All right, so we'll call the meeting to order at 7:08 for the select board and planning board. Right. So we have a couple of planning board members online, and some residents and interested parties also here. I think what we'll do is the same as the last meeting. This is not a public hearing, so people don't have the right to speak, but I think we'll have our discussion and then, entertain comments and questions after that. We wanted to start with just a recap of the prior joint meeting we had that was on December 10th. We just talked about like what criteria we should consider in making this choice of which parcel to include on our zoning district. Some of the things we talked about were traffic, the water supply, stormwater management, fiscal impact, walkability, septic infrastructure, the likelihood that either parcel will be developed, open space protection, the visual impact of the development, topography, impact to abutters, conservation of natural resources, then public benefit, in terms of access to the property and mixed use potential. And after all discussion of all those items, it was, one property had advantages over the other on some of them, and it was the reverse on the others. And what we generally arrived at after all that discussion is whatever developer purchases the property, they're gonna have to figure out how to deal with any, factors that make one property less desirable than the other. The things that we do have control over that's not in the developer's hands are things like the traffic and the fiscal impact, and those are the things that we hired consultants to evaluate for us. So we have consultants here tonight to talk about the traffic study and the fiscal analysis. We're also doing a build-out analysis to look at what either site could look at under different scenarios, even if we didn't include them on the MBTA, to look at what our zoning right now could result in terms of number of units, and that will be available before the public hearing. And then we're also partnering with MVPC to look at some of the policy implications of the MBTA Act. So the next item is an update and review on consultant reports. I guess I already touched on that, but so we have the FXM here.
Yep.
They're first on the, okay. So this first presentation is on the fiscal impact analysis of the MBTA zoning overlay district, and we have FXM associates here. If you want to introduce yourselves, and you can go ahead.
Hi, Angus, you going to put up the presentation?
Yeah, I sure will. You want to say hello first, or yeah?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. I'm Frank Mahady, principal of FXM Associates. And with me is my colleague Diane Sitsos, a senior associate who is the project manager and principal author of the report. She will be delivering the presentation, and we'll I think it's because it's short, it's only about 10 minutes. It's probably best for everybody if you allow us to go through the presentation and then ask your questions afterwards. Is that okay with you guys?
Good.
Sure.
Okay.
Good evening. As Frank said, this is a short presentation. Starting out with the assumptions that were provided to us by the town. These are what we worked under. The first one being, of course, that we were looking at two types of projects, one of 87 multifamily units and the other one of between 35 and 40 multifamily units. In practice, our analysis took the midpoint of 38 multifamily units for that second one. We were to assume that a maximum of 10% of the units would be affordable. That's the maximum allowable under the MBTA Communities Act. And that we would assume an average of 2 bedrooms per unit. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. We would test also the comparison of the per unit revenues and costs of multifamily, defined as 3 or 4 units per building, to duplex and single family homes for an idea of comparability. All values that we use in the report are 2024 dollars, and the impacts that are were laid out at the very end are for the first full year of a completed project. The sources and values that we use, the unit values for the multifamily and duplex units, about $800,000, were based on average condo prices published by the Warren Group for 2024. And for the new single-family home, also in West Newbury, as of 2024, as Warren Group has pegged that at around 939,000. The number of school children for two-bedroom multifamily units, or 0.32 per unit, was estimated using a study done by the UMass Public Policy Center, UMass Dartmouth, in 2016. This is always a very tricky part, is estimating the number of students coming from a unit. And after pretty exhaustive search, we do it every time to see if there's anything newer. This is the best that we have found available. It's divided up by cost of unit, number of units per building, grade levels, so it gets down to pretty fine and that level of analysis. And it's based on a very wide range of projects. The number of school children for the duplex and single family units, higher, actually was provided by the town based on recent comparable developments in West Newbury. And this is something that we rarely get anything really this specific when we're doing these town analyses, but this was an unusual situation, and we're very grateful to the town for getting this for us. The actual numbers of school children, also by grade for the duplex and single family units, 0.67 for duplex and 1.5 children per single family units. So then the municipal data, which we use to estimate budget revenues and expenditures, comes from the Division of Local Services, but it's reported by the town to the Mass Department of Revenue. We use the FY 2024 tax rate, $11.03 per thousand, to estimate property tax revenues. And the assessor provided us with a value of $194,000 to use for the 10% of units that would be affordable, classified as affordable. We use two accepted techniques for fiscal impact assessment. The per household average cost method assumes that non-education costs for new residences will be similar to those of current households on the average. So that, coupled with the proportional valuation method, this is a lot of words, it assigns costs to residents or to households based on the proportion that residential valuation represents of all property valuations. And in West Newbury, it's a pretty high 97%, which means 3% of your valuation is classified as commercial. The estimated number of bedrooms in multifamily units, this is also something that's not easy. We first did a calculation based on the distribution of bedrooms in the West Newbury market area, which was a much larger area than West Newbury proper, and includes 6,700 multifamily units. So you can see it's pretty broad. And that gave us a average number of bedrooms per unit of 1. But in discussions with town officials, they felt that this was too low for West Newbury, which makes sense. So we agreed that we would use 2 bedrooms per unit as a better estimate, and as also a more conservative figure when you're calculating school costs, which, as we'll see, are really determinant of the differences among the various housing types. And we calculated a per pupil cost of $15,670 based on the number of public school children and the town budget that's allocated to education. So the result of that analysis, starting with the table on the left, the multifamily costs and revenues. For multifamily costs, we lead with education at about $5,000 per unit, non-education, $4,700 per unit, giving us total multifamily per unit costs to the town of about $10,000. On the revenue side, property taxes, based on that $800,000 per unit valuation, would be about $8,000, and other revenues, permits, fees, whatever, a little over $3,000, giving us an approximate total multifamily revenues of $11,000. And if we then subtract the costs from the revenues, we get a per unit revenue in positive territory of about $1,500 per unit. In contrast, when we do the duplex annual revenues and costs, the education costs you will see are much higher. There were, if you recall earlier, I said we were estimating 0.67 students per unit compared to 0.32 students for the multifamily units, and that is the reason for the much higher education costs. Non-education costs are the same, and the total duplex same as multifamily, and the total duplex costs come out to a little over $15,000 per unit. On the revenue side, the property tax, as you call valuations for the multifamily unit and the duplex units were the same. And so the property tax of $8,000 is about the same, and the other expenditures revenues about $3,000 for total duplex revenues of $11,200. Which, if we do the same subtraction, we come up with a negative number of $4,000, which means that the net cost to the town per unit per year of duplex housing is about $4,000. And then finally, the single family cost comparison. You see the education costs are much higher. Because in the single family, we were looking at 1.5 school-age children per household, and that accounts for the much higher education costs. The non-education costs are the town average, as the same as the other multifamily and duplex, which gives a total single-family cost of just over $28,000. Property tax on the single family is also higher, over $900,000 of assessed value is yielding property taxes of a little over $10,000 a year. And the other revenues, permits and such, the same as for multifamily and duplex units, giving us total single family revenues of a little over $13,000. And the net of the revenues minus the costs is a minus $14,000, almost minus $15,000. So that's a big number per unit. Those are the net costs to the town. Now, if we put all these together and multiply them by the number of units in each of the different scenarios, for 87 units of multifamily housing development would produce around $129,000 a year in annual revenues for the whole project for the town. And then one-time building permit and utility fees of $346,000. For the 38 units of multifamily housing, the development would yield about $59,000 a year for the total development. and a little over 151,000 for building permits and utility fees. Now, the last four bullets we calculated out purely for comparison purposes without regard to the number of units, duplex or single family, that might be possible on the parcels that you're considering. We did this just purely to compare everything on the same basis. 87 duplex units would be a net cost of almost $350,000. 38 duplex units, a net cost to the town of $152,000. For single family, 87 units, the cost is around $1.3 million. This is net annual. And again, for 38 single family units is a little over $560,000 for 30, again, net for the collection of that many single family homes. So thank you for listening, and we welcome your questions and comments.
Questions?
No.
Questions from you, Chris? Come on, no,
Let
yeah.
somebody else go first.
Any questions?
No, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, the only thing this is just anecdotal, maybe I'll say it, but it's really not relevant. But early on, there was, when you estimated the number of students per household, I think it was, I don't recall which, it was for the multifamily or for the duplex. And there was a number of, no, I'm sorry, the number of bedrooms, average number of bedrooms.
Uh-huh.
Of 1.0, you used 2.0, but I just wondered, how could you ever have, unless they were all just, and you were completely limited to single bedroom units, how, with the exception of that, you couldn't possibly have an average of 1.0, because you can't
Yes.
have less than one bedroom per unit.
We actually, if you look, we did it, it's in the report. We aren't
Yeah.
showing it here, but we did a distribution of number of bedrooms for all those 6,700 units in the market area. And the average comes out to just about one. Counting studio, 1 bedroom, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. And that is not atypical for multifamily housing, not just in West Newbury, but elsewhere. So the initial scenario we ran, actually, we said, okay, let's be a little conservative in terms of school costs. We ran it at 1.5 bedrooms. And then in talking with the town, they wanted us to run it at 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, okay.
So the
that's
so the
fine.
0.3, let me just finish. The
Okay.
0.32 school age kids that come out for the 2-bedroom scenario is coincidentally the average for all housing in West Newbury. So that's a very, very conservative number for multifamily housing. I wouldn't expect it to be that many in practice.
I did have one question, maybe Chris has the same one, so. Hi Frank and Diane, thank you. My question is on the other revenues here. I know, you said that the numbers are for the first full year of development. Are those other revenues, including the one-time revenues like the building permit fees?
No,
No, okay.
I'll tag onto your question. What are other revenues?
They're from the town budget, allocated on a per household basis. They include fees, permits, licensing, excise taxes,
But
all
I
the
think in
things that
reality
you,
check,
all
I think
all the non-property tax revenues that the town collects.
But I don't think $3,000 is generated, particularly by a small unit, because your biggest drive is gonna be excise tax. After that, maybe a dog license. You're under $1,000. I just got my excise bill the other day. It's $400, $500 for 3 vehicles, and dog is $15. I don't know what the other.
We're assuming in this method of analysis that the average costs and revenues per household are the same as those for the town as a whole. You can argue that certain types of housing and the people who live in them may be spending less on licenses and fees and excise taxes than others, but we have no way of knowing that without a specific development. So
There's no
that's
reality.
why we
And the
use the,
$3,000 comes out of the budget figures that are submitted to the state. They're not something that we estimated.
no, exactly. So if you divide that up by, on a per household basis and assign it here, that's what you get. You could make the same argument on the cost side, that you're making on the
Does that
revenue
include,
sides, that they're not exactly the same depending on the type of household and their income and whatever, but we have no way of knowing what that is.
Does that include, are you including in that things like, state funds to the town, such as chapter 90 monies, and kind of allocating that across the
Yes.
community on a per
Yes.
house basis?
Yes. But
Yep.
you get almost no school aid,
Right.
chapter 70.
Yeah, yes.
Really, it was
That
quite
was-
Yeah,
amazing.
not something you don't already know. Yeah, no, this includes all sources of funding, and it's spelled out in more detail in the full report, if you're interested, and we can provide additional detail if that doesn't satisfy you. It comes out of your budget, and just divide your budget for all categories by the number of households, and that's how we get the number that we use.
That's the
Yeah,
average cost method
Right.
that we talked about.
Yeah, my question is on, the calculation on the number of school children. And I just want to clarify, it says number of school children, you came up with this 0.67 and 1.5 based on recent comparable developments in West Newbury.
Correct.
So, the two largest developments we've had are cottage style units. And they have typically 2 bedrooms each, maybe a very tiny third, a couple of them, they're small units. And kind of based on what number then are we looking at? Because they're all single family units. Are we assuming that those cottage units supporting 1.5 kids per unit? Because there's no way that's happening.
Well,
We're not assuming that those are the numbers that we got from your planner's office that we're able to obtain from the school department and the information on the development. Those were not our estimates or assumptions. They were,
But we
So
have,
I can elaborate a little bit. So we looked at,
Okay.
Drake's Landing and Fallsby. We provided those to the school department, and they gave us the actual numbers of students enrolled in the school on those streets. So those are actual
there were
numbers.
50 children in Drake's Landing. I mean, I was behind the bus today. Is that what I'm
No.
looking at?
Did it,
No.
I don't think I came
No,
up with this.
Very few, wasn't.
I know, so I guess what I'm curious, those are single family units. We've got 34,
So single
Drake's,
family
right?
Fallsby and Drake's, there's duplexes and.
they're
Yeah.
single units.
But they're duplex, there's duplexes in
There's
there.
a couple of duplexes, but the majority is single unit. So I don't understand. There's no way there's 50, however you do the math.
Wait, he's multiplying the number.
well, the
again.
school
I
thinks they
take the
do.
number of units by 1.5, I mean,
you can see the raw data that the town provided us. I'm sure they'll be happy to share it with you. Katrina has it. And it
Oh, yeah,
lists,
we all
and
got
it
the
lists by
report.
unit, it lists by unit the number of school-age children reported to the town, what type of unit it is.
And what grade level they're in. I mean, it's very specific information.
yeah, I'll take a look there, it's fine, I appreciate it.
Sure, no, that's fine. Again, we didn't make this up. This was
No,
provided
no,
to
no,
us by the
I
town.
know that.
And admittedly, I will say further, that admittedly, this is a relatively small sample, but it's what's actually happened in West Newbury. So you guys thought that would be a good comparable to use. If we get fewer than 0.67 kids in duplex units per unit, and fewer than 1.5 if you were to get in single family homes, obviously the net fiscal cost would be less. But these are the numbers you gave us to work with. And again, I will say one more time that the 0.32 school-age children per unit is a high number for multifamily housing.
Right.
Just so I understand the comparable developments, Trina, it was Drake's Landing was the cottages?
And
And Collins.
Yeah.
And we got the numbers from the school.
And so that's right through high school, is that? High school. age?
Kindergarten through grade 12. Yep.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Or nursery school actually through grade 12.
Ann and Ted, did you have any questions or comments?
No questions on my end. This is great. Thank you for walking us through it.
Oh, our pleasure.
Welcome.
No, I don't have any questions, but I'll be
Okay.
interested in some of these things like Brian's questions and so forth, because these are the things that we will be asked
Yeah.
at the hearing.
For sure.
I know.
Chris?
That's what I thought. We kids are doing.
Bit of an editorial and then a question. I think at the end of the day, the development is gonna cost the town in tax revenue loss at some point. Some of these numbers, I'm not sure about, but I don't think that's how we make a decision based on this zoning change.
I think that just as a point of overview, we do a lot of these kinds of analyses, and every community is surprised by how much a single family home costs them. And it costs every community virtually across the board for single family homes because they have more school age kids. Equally surprised they are at the fewer number of school age kids generated in multifamily housing. These are empirical facts. None of this is made up. All the sources are documented and can be checked and rechecked. But your skepticism is understandable. We hear it all the time. How can multifamily housing be so profitable and single family homes not? Well, that's how the numbers work.
Well, I
All
understand that.
based on school age kids.
But another consideration thing I was thinking about, West Newbury's at a bit of a logjam with housing right now. We've got a lot of aging in place with, it's not advantageous for people to move. There are no units to downsize into. So when these units get built, I can envision people in a, 4,000 square foot house moving into these units. What that does, it opens up the 4,000 square foot house. Now, you don't put any kids into this building facility, but you just opened up 3 kids coming into the house. There's been no consideration of that in this formulation.
No, we can't. We have no
No.
way of knowing that.
And that wasn't our scope.
And it's not that common, by the way, but again, we didn't examine it.
I would say, Chris, that what you're suggesting is that if one of these subdivision goes in, if there's gonna be more of a turnover within town.
It opens the opportunity for that, which is not currently available. And I know from talking to a lot of people, they're excited about this component with the ability to do that. In the last 3, 4, 5 years, the market is jammed in town. So that's just one consideration, but it's what it is.
Yep. Any further questions for XM? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary,
Our next presentation is a traffic impact analysis by TEC. Andrew here.
Hey.
We heard the story about his daughter running into you in your lab, or your golden retriever, sorry.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the board and public. My name is Kevin Dandry. I'm a principal at TEC. And first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to continue to work with the town on an important assignment like this, where we can give you some guidance as it relates to the traffic setting for the proposal that could be on one of these two parcels as part of your zoning consideration. I had authored a report dated February 5th, so very recently. So timing of the meeting is great to give you a summary of the relevant facts, but also some of the attributes that might help guide some of your decision-making for which candidate site may be most appropriate for the town to consider. Let's see if this works. Okay, it does. So I tried to prepare a succinct presentation just to give you the things that are common to both sites, and then some of the things that differ a little bit. But a review of the traffic data that we've collected, some of what we had done as part of the corridor study that is ongoing with the town, excuse me, with the town. Others, other data we collected specific to this assignment in the area of Harrison and the NAP parcel, just because it was creating the fourth leg to an existing intersection. I'll describe how we go about generating the estimates for how many trips can be expected from a project like this. Different elements related to the site access, which is a little different for each parcel. The intersection operations and the analysis that we do to look at delays. And then finally, some planning considerations for opportunities that may be, you know, focused in front of you right now, but opportunities to then look at what you might be able to do to best plan for other successive developments, if there are any. When we talk about how much traffic is on Main Street today, this is a roadway that is owned and controlled by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. So any proposal that might be on either one of these parcels might involve site plan review, other reviews with the town, but ultimately the developer would have to get a permit from DOT. On the left, you can see with the NAP property, which is to the west of the two. This is data that we just collected in early January, once schools were back in session. You can see the data here that the raw number is the morning peak. The one in parentheses is the evening peak in both cases. So there's somewhere between 300 and 400 vehicles per hour as through traffic in each direction. When you look at the data on the right near the Dunn property, this was done back in May. But again, when you look at the similarities of the volumes on 113 on Main Street, it's very consistent throughout the year because of where West Newbury sits and its connectivity to other regional roadways. So that's kind of the scene for what traffic is there today. The only thing I will note is that Harrison Avenue, it is currently limited to right out only because of the sightline challenges coming off that side of the roadway. But you can see at 15 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, very light volume.
Could I just ask something about that?
Sure.
Most of the traffic goes on Pleasant, which kind of runs parallel to Harrison. Very few people, I think, use Harrison because it's so tight, you know, so.
Could be.
Yeah,
Yes.
is that evaluate, do you know, the traffic on? Pleasant?
We didn't do a specific count there, but because that is a separate intersection
Yeah,
downstream from where the access point would be for the NAP property.
yeah, okay.
And I'll talk about, you know, the opinions for what may be outside of the specific area of the two driveways momentarily.
Okay,
When we look at how much traffic we can expect from a development like this, on the left side, you can see what we use as a wealth of data that's provided by the Institute of Transportation Engineers for different types of residential uses and other uses for that matter. This is something that we've already done and tested to know that this is conservative. And, you know, as part of the foundation for what we studied was 40 units on each parcel. Knowing that there, I think as the fiscal analysis showed that roughly 2 units 2 bedrooms per unit, but understanding that it might be potentially limited by septic capacity or other things. So for either site, we looked at 40 units. And we have a very good, well-tested set of data points. And we look at, on the right side, what you can expect on a daily basis, weekday commuter hour, evening commuter hour, Saturday daily, and in the middle of the day on Saturday. Broad numbers, it's gonna be roughly 300 cars in the course of a day as the total of entering and exiting vehicles from any development that is around 4 units. We looked at a single family attached, so it'd be similar to the duplex style units that have been contemplated as a use. If you had other denser units per building, then the number would only go down from what we've estimated. So this should be a pretty conservative assessment for what you could expect on a daily basis.
All right, let me jump right in there. Just want to make sure I'm understanding this. You're saying for 40 units, you're expecting 300 trip
Per day.
per day.
Yep.
So help me out. Is that 7.5 per unit?
Yeah, right around there. Regular single family homes, if they're, in a traditional subdivision, that number per day is closer to 10 per day per unit. Yeah, it is.
When that's trip ends, correct? So if someone leaves and comes back, that counts as 2, is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Yep, and that's why we show the ins and the outs and then the total. But if you contemplate, you might have a unit with 2 occupants, 2 vehicles. One might go to work at 6:30, the other one goes to work at 8:30. There might be a school related trip or a shopping related trip or an Amazon trip. But all these types of trips are generated by a development of that size. But I think what's really important to understand is because not everybody, and I get this question all the time, not everybody leaves the house all at the same time. You've got different trends. In fact, as you can imagine, during the COVID pandemic, a lot of people were working from home. So a lot of the commuter type trips went down, but then you'd have more trips in the middle of the day as people got out of the house. So when we look at the normal trip trends for something of this nature, and you look at the total for the morning and the evening, somewhere around 20 trips per hour as the sum of in and out. In the morning, there's more people leaving the house. In the evening, there's more people coming back. But when you think about 20 trips per hour, on average, 1 every 3 minutes, it's a good way of relating to it. So then the next question is, okay, we know the type of use, we know how many trips will generate. How can the properties be accessed? This is something the town provided with the sketches that were done a while back. Looking at the potential to access with a primary driveway off Main Street for both properties. The one on the left, the Knapp property it was envisioned to be the 4th leg across from Harrison. And the Dunn property would be a new driveway / roadway intersection just east of Church Street. What does it look like? You'll probably drive by it every day, but as far as the Knapp property, has a wide open curb cut today where people used to park up against and off the edge of Main Street. This is a wide open expanse of the edge of State Highway. When we look at the Dunn property just east of Church Street, it is currently a more defined driveway, but understanding there's a lot of topography in that area. I'll get into that in a moment. So we talked about how many trips are generated in those peak hours. It's right around 20. We look at the distribution of traffic. So if you look at the appendix of our report, and hopefully I don't put anybody to sleep, but when we look at the journey to work data that's put out by the US Census Bureau, We use this routinely because it talks about people that live in West Newbury, where do they work? So it's a really good test for the predominant peak hour trends for who's going where. And then one of my engineers had gone through, because Angus and I had the same question. I had mine about 3 hours before in going through the analysis, but he had the same question I did for my engineer, which was, okay, why is it different between the Knapp property and the Dunn property?
Well, it was the exact mirror image.
Yeah.
The
So-
data.
The real reason is because when we do a number of different assessments for folks that might work further down 95. And the fact that during the peak hours, you're not likely going all the way out 113 because the fastest route is to go down via Maple and somewhere to the south. So that's why you might see in the morning on the left side, 10 people taking a right out of the Knapp property, go towards town center and then take another right and head further south. But from the Dunn property, it's a left turn to try to do the same thing. So when you look at these numbers, most of them are in the single digits. Because when you break up the ins and the outs and you break up the lefts and the rights, it's a very low volume in any particular direction from either one of these sites. With that in mind, when you compare it to the 300 to 400 vehicles per hour that are currently on Main Street, I do not anticipate any noticeable impact to any of the adjacent intersections along Main Street with a project of this scale. When we talk about some of the safety elements of site access, and this is something that not only should be contemplated within your site plan review, but will absolutely be discussed with DOT as they evaluate any sort of permit, is what are the sight lines? It's something, development of this size, 40 units, doesn't need anything more than a normal roadway width, just say 24 feet wide, single lane in each direction. But when you look at the sight lines left and right, we see different attributes for the two parcels. On the left is looking left and right from the Knapp property driveway location. And when we do this, it's based on industry guidance from the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. As a standard within our industry, and looking at stopping sight distance and intersection sight distance, where is that vantage point for the car that's on the side street? The driver. And that's based on 14.5 feet back from the white line to where that person would be sitting, looking left or right. We've approximated it with both of these views. The Knapp property is on the outside of the curve. So when you look left and right, you can look for a longer extent in those directions. On the right with the Dunn property, when you look left towards Church Street and Town Center, there's this large embankment on the south side of the road that partially impedes that sight line. Looking to the right, you can see the large tree. There's a tree in the distance. None of those things are by themselves something that would need to be removed. You don't need an entirely clear sight line, but there might be some trimming of lower limbs or something to try to maximize that view. But that looking to the right is more easily attainable.
Wait, if I could jump in here. If you go back to that, please. If I remember right, the Knapp property had more traffic turning right and the Dunn property had more traffic turning left.
Yep.
So you got better sight lines for the more traffic at Knapp and worse sight lines for the more traffic at Dunn.
Yes, and when we talk about more traffic, it's
small.
It's small.
Yeah.
And I don't anticipate, and you can actually, and you probably see this as you're driving east-west this time of year, you can see my colleague's shadow on the right. So solar glare can be an issue at times, different sections of the road. It's not all year long, but in this particular case, there is more left turning traffic from the Dunn property and with a currently challenging sightline.
So he took the picture around 1:30 in the afternoon.
It was more like 3:30. But
Let's see.
yeah, long shadows. When we actually went through our measurements to approximate what those sightlines are, there's two types of requirements. There's the minimum, which is the safety-based one to say, if you pulled out in the traffic, you know, you'd have a sight line that would allow for somebody to stop in time and try to avoid a crash.
If they
The,
were, if they weren't texting.
if they were texting, right? And eating a Big Mac and doing a bunch of other things. The third column is what we call the desired minimum, which is more capacity related. So if you think about the ability for somebody to observe an oncoming car, pull into traffic and start to accelerate without the car that might just come into view not decelerating by a disproportionate amount. But the guidance says, you know, it's about 15%. Below that, then you start to, I would say, annoy approaching vehicles by pulling it. It's safe, but it may cause some people to slow down. But although we have superior sight lines at the Knapp property in the upper rows at over 500 feet. The view from Harrison, we just put that for as a perspective looking left because you don't have to worry about looking right because you're limited to right out only. The Dunn property driveway near Church Street falls well below under current conditions at only 230 feet looking left, 375 looking right. So looking right, you can satisfy the minimum, but you can't quite get to the desired level. But obviously looking left, we need to contemplate something needs to change. So I put this exhibit just to give a reference from the approximate location of the Dunn property driveway to get the 300 feet for the minimum safety needs. You'd have to go, you know, roughly 100 feet beyond Church Street and kind of cut that corner. The problem is that because now you're on the inside of the curve, as opposed to the Knapp property where you're on the outside, you can see as it goes away. Now you're kind of fighting the curve with your sight line. So the photo on the right is an image of that slope of the earth that comes down right to the edge of State Highway. So if you can picture needing to do something that would peel that slope back, it could be one of a couple things. If you desire to have a sidewalk on that side, you could have a retaining wall to back a sidewalk to try to open up that sideline. But it is a considerable slope. It would not be necessarily easy or inexpensive to go try to open that up, but it is a consideration. It is solvable. It's just one of the considerations that you all need to keep in mind. When we talk about capacity of the intersection delays, both sites are understandably very similar because we're talking about low volume of traffic, good levels of service. You know, when we talk about the A through F, all that really is a relationship to how many seconds people wait. But in all cases, it's somewhere less than 20 seconds on average per vehicle that would seek to get out of either one of those developments. Something that I have no concerns about, doesn't prompt a need for any extra lanes anywhere. Wouldn't justify left turn lanes on Main Street either to get into either one of those sites. So from a capacity perspective, there's very similar and there's really not a need for anything unique. Finally, when we talk about, you know, I can't help myself but to look at, because I sat on a planning board for several years and, you know, it's the one thing to focus right on what's in front of you, but also taking a step back and saying, what else might be possible as we plan for not just this, but other potential things that may come down the line. With the Knapp property, There are adjacent parcels that have open land in the back that if ever developed, there is a potential that you might want to consider things like cross connections, rights of way easements, to not preclude the ability to have, say, the Knapp property's driveway do more for more properties than maybe what it would do in isolation. When you look at the Dunn property, there are even more opportunities. And it's not just to access Main Street, but when you look at the size of some of these parcels, I would highly recommend that you contemplate the potential for cross connections here, because not only could you have the opportunity to then have a road that gets down to Maple, but you could keep going in my lowermost yellow arrow. There are other large parcels where the interconnectivity of parcels could allow you to distribute traffic and not create bottlenecking with a bunch of cul-de-sacs that may be close to meeting, but not quite there. So I only show this as the opportunity to contemplate cross connections, or even in the case of the Knapp property, things like, even if it's not possible now, but a future emergency access connection, something like that. So that's a summary of what we've done with our analysis. There are very similar aspects to both sites, but the real thing that separates them is the sightline characteristics, as I mentioned.
With the Dunn property, Church Street's right there. Did you look at the volume of traffic at that intersection on Church and Main? I mean, you've got two intersections potentially that are close enough, and sometimes those interactions are complicated.
They can be, I think with, let's see. So I'll go all the way back to the image on the right.
Let me just reshare a second.
Actually, you could go forward a couple of images. It was a little more focused on my concerns there.
Things clear. Yeah, there you go.
Keep going. Keep going. Right there.
So the question was, given how close the Dunn property driveway may be to Church Street, how do those interact? We did account at Church Street as part of the corridor planning study. And there are a lot of left turns from Main Street, I'll call it northeast bound, that take a left onto Church in that area. Not too many lefts out of Church Street. But because it's a positive offset of the intersection, then anybody trying to come from, say, Newburyport that would take a left into the Dunn property would be doing so at a distance away of about 200 feet from where the left turns would try to go onto Church. That type of distance doesn't concern me.
Okay, so there's enough of an offset there that you don't see a
Yes.
problematic complication.
I do not, and the biggest thing for me is, looking to improve that sightline, and then it's low enough volume too, where the number of conflicts is also very low.
And you would have a similar feeling about the proximity to Pleasant Street. The Pleasant Street intersection is far enough offset from Harrison that you don't see that as a problematic interaction either.
No, that doesn't concern me.
Thank you.
Question on this photo. So with your experience and knowledge of how MassDOT looks at things, would they say, hey, because this is a state highway and Mr. Developer, you've got to carve out that hillside? Would they be as stringent as that? And it's an opinion, but would they be likely, say, you've got to carve out part of that hill to improve the sightline?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, this is kind of definitive,
100%.
okay.
What, what that?
No, that's
I
more
mean,
than I was expecting.
it seems to me that we would want that anyway. That carving out that hillside is gonna be a big deal too, because it's a steep hillside and it's not gonna be stable. I mean, it's marginally stable
Now
right
you're
now.
talking about
And-
some
and-
sort of retaining wall, and that's expensive.
Right, and
Yeah.
a pretty serious retaining wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we, you know, as we first were getting accustomed to some of the different aspects of the corridor. This is one section, there's another section further to the west near Nantucket High School where you've got a lot of slopes that come right down to the edge of the road. So when we're looking at different options for roadway and sidewalks and things like that, there are certain key areas of the corridor where things like that wouldn't be easy. This is one example where it's not easy, but it is attainable. And it's just a matter of doing dollars, earthwork, retaining wall. But I think because you have to peel it back to do a retaining wall, it's a good opportunity for that particular site where you could get a sidewalk on that side of the road just to make good use of that land off the curb line. And it brings up pedestrian access too, because obviously what we're trying to do is plan for the future in things that we're doing concurrently with the corridor study with opportunities for if one of these sites goes and not the other, but there is already the crosswalk at Harrison. And one thing that we're recommending that the town pursue with the state is upgrading all of the crosswalks throughout town to have a more enhanced safety experience. But the fact that there's already accessible curb ramps there on the north side, this is sidewalk on the north side throughout this entire area. It's just a matter of how you get from the developments to that sidewalk. Again, if that slope is pulled back, you could have a crosswalk location with signs and warning devices. And that kind of equalizes that, but whatever you do here, I would highly recommend that be part of the permit discussions, not just for vehicles, but to get pedestrians across the street.
Question, would you, yeah, just because I'm curious, on something like that, just looking at that picture, is that a candidate for a traditional cantilever retaining wall or mechanically stabilized earth or?
That is not my area of expertise, but I can tell you that, that is something where you could do segmental block, you could do a lot of different products that could be there that could be part of the design that the development team does.
Yeah, I was just wondering if.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing the soil characteristics, and I have other very smart people, some of whom you taught, in my office that do that type of design. But whatever the development team does, I think something like that, even though the state may review it, I would suggest that the town have a peer reviewer for that as well.
Just had a question, on the, location of the driveway. It sounds like it wouldn't make much difference, but if the driveway were pulled back, so it was further east where the house is now located, right? Would that make any difference? Is that?
It might make a difference, to minimize the slope work a little bit. But we were assuming that there might be a desire to retain that existing structure, but
Yeah, I mean,
the further east
There is
you
an
go,
existing driveway on the other side of the house.
right, yeah, with a barn.
But I don't know that you have enough width to work out without
Yeah.
demolishing the house kind of thing.
Well, I think the assumption is on the other property, we're demolishing the houses, right, because it looks like right where the
Yeah.
driveways are, the house is currently.
The other thing, if the house was moved, or the driveway was moved further to the east, there's a big, I don't know if there's a big oak or a big maple. To the east.
Yeah.
Right.
And the closer you get to that, the larger angular portion of your view that's gonna cut, and there's already busyness around there, the cars parked. You know, when you start, the more busyness you throw in along the roadside, when you're pulling out, glancing quickly, you misinterpret what's there.
and I would say that, with all the different studies that we've done and, you know, one or two isolated trees where you can, your vantage point as a view, as a motorist on the side street, you could stay back a little bit or creep forward a little bit. We base it on what the standards say, but understanding the practicality that somebody may pause 14.5 feet back, but then sneak forward a little bit to obtain a vantage point is something that is always done, but we have to look at the prerequisites of what the guidance is. But understanding the practicality of what people do. In the case of a tree like that, knowing that you can, even in the image, you can see behind it and in front of it. I'm not worried about that as a limited obstruction within that site triangle.
I have a question on, as you know, the MBTA zoning act requires that the zoning would allow development as a matter of right. So the planning board here in many towns is accustomed to more of a special permit context where there's more explicit authority for a planning board to impose conditions, so on and so forth. So getting back to the DOT and what they may impose, how would the timing of that work if the developer is before the planning board seeking site plan approval, but needs the curb cut access permit from DOT? At what point would the planning board know that DOT is or is not going to require something like that? Because where MBTA zoning is such a new thing and there's not really case law, I want to make sure the planning board understands kind of what its authority is or isn't to impose a condition for an offsite, or even, that kind of grading, as opposed to DOT, which it sounds like would have very clear authority to do that in this case.
Yes, and I wouldn't necessarily worry in this case that you'd be handing over that review capacity to the DOT because, in all the different projects that we do for them, but also permit projects that we've had to submit to them, it's a very thorough process. I would recommend that they do it concurrently. If they're smart, they'll do it concurrently because one can affect the other. Any access considerations that the state may chime in and say, we'd like this type of treatment could, in reference to the slope, could affect what the site plan shows. So they kind of go hand in hand, but I think that they would have access to this document that would give them enough guidance, particularly for the Dunn property, to make sure they do their homework in advance. It's not abnormal to do an informal with the District 4 office to say, here's what we're thinking about. Here are the things that are driving the access point. Here are the characteristics. We're going to be in front of the board for a site plan review, say, and trying to make sure that those different processes are married.
Yeah, and certainly we do our part, whichever site is brought forward. If the zoning's approved, we've got good dialogue with District 4, and we could,
And they do like hearing that.
let them know, hey, this is zoned and these are some of the concerns, and make sure I'm sure they would notice it too,
But they love hearing from towns when things are under review, so that even copies of different minutes, etc.
Any other questions for Kevin?
Just good work you got here.
It was top well.
I even passed class.
We could probably share a funny story if you did, but I'm available if there are subsequent questions after tonight's meeting.
Okay.
But it's been a pleasure working with the town, so thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in too.
Oh, my pleasure. Evening loans for 34 years.
All right, so the next item is discussion. So we want to try to figure out which site best meets the requirements of the act with the least impact to our residents. So I'm not sure, does everybody already, I'm asking the planning board, do you have a sense of what your preference is at this point?
I do, yeah.
I did too.
Yes.
I think on an individual basis, we haven't discussed it as a
Right.
board.
Right, so I'll leave it up to you, Ray, to manage how you want the conversation.
Well, I think, I don't know if we can throw out the pros and cons. Bring it put together for us.
Is that something that's on the website?
I don't think it was.
No, it was not.
It was in the packet that you had mailed out this morning, or yesterday morning. But I mean, we don't have to go through all the pros and
We
cons. I
can just
mean,
talk about.
yeah, they kind of my feeling was they kind of washed out in most areas. And I'm just gonna speak bluntly here, because I don't think there's any way to get this done without just being straightforward. Even though politically it's a sensitive thing. There's the sightline issue. I mean, it's something that could be handled. And, you know, it would be something that would, I assume, extra costs would go to the developers to deal with the slope and the sideline. So that's not a direct cost to the town. The change in the viewscape for the residences, for the residents of town, that could be upsetting to some for some time. Nobody really likes change. You know, cutting that slope back would be, you know, it'd be pretty ugly for a while. I think the biggest issue in my mind is the fact that, you know, Knapp, realistic and just again, speaking bluntly, Knapp is going to be developed. And sooner rather than later. Dunn may not be developed for a while. So to me, that's the biggest issue. And to my point of view, since it's gonna be developed. And the relative difference in cost to the town and how it would look, whether it's part of MBTA zoning or not, I think is actually fairly minor. So that's why I'm leaning towards Knapp. And yeah. I mean, I think the sightline is significant, but I don't think it's huge, and I also think that the access point would likely move to the east some. And that would make the amount of earthwork that you have to do less and improve the sightlines. I think in the end, any future developer is gonna look at that. So I think it boils down to what's likely to be developed.
I agree. I've got a couple of thoughts that haven't really come up either. When Dodson Flicker did plans for both sites, I really like the fact that the Knapp property does not change the streetscape much at all. There will be buildings that will come down, but the site seems like it will accommodate, say, 30 units in a way that has very little impact on traffic, sites, the beauty of the town, the number of neighbors who are impacted. It seems a better parcel for so many reasons. The other thing that we haven't really talked about is that the Dunn property, that steep slope that comes down to the street, backs up on a hill that was cut away. And as I recall, that earth was used to fill the landfill out on Georgetown Road. And I also recall that there were some limitations that were placed on what could be done with Dunn in exchange for removing the dirt. Does no one else remember this as something that happened or that
Before my time.
Yeah, maybe.
Rick,
No, would have been before my time too, and
Chris?
No, I heard nothing about it.
I
but
don't remember that.
where would that, I mean, if there was an agreement, presumably it was documented somehow,
They have to.
No one's ever
register.
brought it up. So I.
Yeah,
What
I don't
time frame are
think
you
it-
talking, Deborah?
Well, I've been in my house 50 years. We used to go to the dump on Georgetown Road every Saturday, probably the first 10 years I lived here, so let's say 40 years ago. But it seems to me that there were limitations on what could be done with Don. I just don't want these to come up, you know, if we
You
opted
have
for.
to talk to either Bert or Richard Thurlow.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in town since '83, and did go to the dump. Maybe a year or two, I mean, it was that recent, I mean, it was that short a time span. I don't know about any agreement, but I mean, I think that the landfill was closed somewhere in the mid-80s, more or less. And I agree, you get a hold of Bert.
Well, I mean, if there's an agreement, it has to be in the registry.
Yeah, it's recorded, and sometimes those agreements lapse though too.
They do, actually, they can't exceed 30 years.
Yeah.
There's a restriction on a property. Can't exceed 30 years unless it's a conservation restriction.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Or affordable housing.
even that is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for the reasons that Ray stated, that, you know, the Knapp property wants to be developed. This is an opportunity for us to do the right thing for so many reasons. And wearing my affordable housing trust hat as well, even to get 10% affordable housing out of this is a plus for a little bit of diversification in what we have to offer. Old people who need to scale back and young people who'd like to come to town. So I like the Knapp property as well.
I also, when it comes to kids, I like the proximity to the middle and high school.
Yes, I've kind of been in favor of the Knapp parcel all along, and to me, it seems as if it's an easier parcel for a developer to handle. And I do know, and I'm very certain that it will be developed in some fashion. And just designated as MBTA, however, it does not mean it would still not be developed in a different fashion. It gives anyone who
More options.
it gives an option. It doesn't mandate anything. Yes, I think it gives us, I recognize that there are people on Merrill Street who would not be happy with a viewscape up that hill would change. There'll be a bit of a roof line up there. The benefit of the town is it would appear that the way the parcel has been laid out for the developable acreage is that we maintain that viewscape up with a poppies grow and the field to a degree, or it would at least be maintained in that fashion. That's a plus. So I think for a lot of practical reasons in the short term, that's the parcel I would choose.
I concur as well. I think that, you know, a lot of these points have been covered, so I won't repeat them, but I think that that property is preferred. You know, I think there are less potential traffic issues. You know, I understand, you know, there's some separation with Church Street, but I think, you know, that is a concern that I do have because, you know, if there are accidents, they seem to be more, you know, focused in that area. You know, and I think the Dunn property, it's going to take a lot to develop that property, just moving a lot of material and adding a lot of material. I do get concerned about the neighbors there too, you know, on each side, the impact, you know, runoff, you know, potential of that. You know, I think that you know, the fact that there's a willing development partner as well makes a big difference. I'd love to see, you know, the agricultural use preserved, you know, on the other property, if that's at all possible, the town needs that. It's really hard to do that on a small farm basis, but it'd be great. It's been a few years now, but, you know, that's still an opportunity at least at that property. You know, I'd say that, you know, although that, when we did the modeling, we've done so much work, you know, on these properties, you know, and not just us, but, you know, residents, you know, when they came to those meetings, and you did all that modeling, literally modeled the property, right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it seemed like Dunn maybe had more potential, but it was very marginal, you know, and it would have to be located towards the back of the property. And which didn't seem ideal necessarily. So, anyway, that's where I come on, okay, agree with their consensus so far.
And I want to hear from Ann.
Yes, many of the considerations on the two sites were quite similar, as we said at the beginning of the meeting. I think the topography and the sight lines are much, are more challenging at Dunn. And just because something can be done, we've been there before with these highly engineered solutions, which often have failure points that can't be anticipated and are often somewhat unattractive. So I think that tips the scales toward Knapp for me.
And I wanted to hear from Ted too.
Yeah, I think I really have nothing to add here. To me, it's been pretty clear all along that Knapp is the right property for this, and today it just made it, crystal clear that that's the right decision. So I'm with everyone on that note.
One further point, that Mr. Tech, I'm sorry, Kevin rightly mentioned, the McGinnis parcel, 15 Merrill Street is 14.5 acres. It used to be a horse property decades ago, and it abuts the back of the Knapp property. It does, and there's significant wetlands, of course, that go all the way back to Tewksbury, beyond all that, but that's an interesting option, that there could be further development in an area that connects to Knapp, just something for the future. The parcel on the other side of Knapp as well, there's a 13-acre parcel. I think most of that is wet. But that's an attractive notion here. I'm very familiar with what's going on around Dunn, and in addition to the steep hill, both the property that Nathan Dennis owns next door and the bigger property further down Maple Street are not great candidates to be further developed.
The topography.
Yeah, they're steep, there's very little access to either property from Main Street or from Maple Street. So I like the Knapp property better every time I look at it.
Either of you want to make any comments or contribute? It's not a vote, but.
Yeah, I just have a point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is this the time for us to take a vote, an official vote on this?
Yes.
Or ask the select board chair, did you want to discuss this amongst yourselves?
What I was gonna suggest.
Before we vote.
I
Yeah,
was
what I
just
was-
asking if Rick or Chris wanted to make a comment, but
Yeah, and what I was gonna suggest is now we sort of got the feel of the planning board, but we get input from the select board. And then we can make a motion.
and I don't know if you want to take comments from people that are here or online as well.
We could do that.
Yeah. Do either of you want to comment?
Sure, I'd love to. I mean, I guess from the start, from the very beginning, when these two parcels were being looked at as alternatives, I thought the Knapp property was clearly the better alternative for reasons that have already been enumerated. I'm not gonna go there because you've already said everything, but there's at least half a dozen reasons why I think the Knapp property is more appropriate than the Dunn property. And the other one is something that, my final point is something that nobody else has mentioned, and it's really kind of maybe out of bounds in this conversation, but I'm gonna say it anyway, is why wouldn't or shouldn't there be some consideration of mixed use at the front we need more commercial development in this town. If there was a coffee shop or something like that, something that, of course, whoever develops the property, we know who that might be. I'm not looking around, of course, that would be their prerogative to follow through if that was allowed. It just strikes me that, there's an opportunity that hasn't even been talked about yet, and it ought to be discussed.
Well, the fact that, you know, there's been a business there for decades means that
Right.
it wouldn't be a big imposition on
Right,
existing
right,
butters.
exactly.
They're
There's,
used to-
I mean, there's sort of semi-grandfathered. There's been a business there. There's an agricultural related business. And this is with, you know, anything else would be totally different type of business, but still there's been a business there.
Right.
It's been a commercial location.
I don't know, if it's specifically called out that MBTA encourages commercial business, but I'm sure they do, because in a larger city arrangement, that they would like a retail activity and
Yeah,
whatnot. And if not, then I think we would be incumbent to see if there's some additional zoning that might be needed.
And there's also.
I don't know.
You can also,
I think it's a great idea.
you can do a lot of businesses through a special permit process too, even when it's outside the commercial zone.
in more than one conversation that I've listened to about, you know, MBTA communities, you know, the allowances, the requirements and the allowances, mixed use has been used. Now typically, you know, that's accompanied by a picture that shows a building with a business down below and 1 or 2 stories of housing above. But, you know, I've never heard anything that implied that was limited to that.
Right.
So.
It is the net property in. I know the maps, the downtown map is a U instead of an R, right? This is an R map, does that mean anything? I mean,
It's a residential.
it's
zone.
it's a residential
Yeah.
zone, it's not
Right.
part of the downtown.
Oh, right, yeah, no, it's outside of this, could be a commercial, or
That's
limited
my
commercial
question,
district,
thank you.
Yeah, as you can see, that it's a very, very small,
Yeah.
it's just this pink area on the map is all that's zoned for business near the Dunn property.
That's a little. That triggers me, the whole commercial district. That's another subject.
Yes.
Chris, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I do and I don't, but I will. As I said a couple of meetings ago, I don't feel as a select board, we've dug deep enough into this to make a real evaluation on the properties. I've never set foot on Dunn. I mean, the greenhouse, we did buy stuff that needs to be open. All the other evaluation criteria that should be looked at on the raw parcels, I haven't been engaged on because this came to us late in the process. But with the discussion that the planning board has tonight, it makes it pretty easy and the outcome is obvious, and I think it's probably the right choice. And for the 2 biggest reasons, number one is Dunn's property is not for sale. They don't have an interest in it. We've been told everything else. So if the town is genuine and sincere about doing MBTA housing, you've got one option. If you want to forestall the process and play a game, you would go with Dunn, but I don't think that's the wisest choice. I think for that, that's a pretty big criteria for me. And the second, I know he's sitting right there, is a developer and he's a known quantity. And I've known John for 30 years. He was on planning board. He's got integrity.
Potential developer.
Either way, he's looking at the parcel. What I'm thinking is if you said Dunn, you don't know who you're gonna get. You could get some firm out of a big city who wants to do something totally egregious, what we would be offended by. John has at least, he's lived in the town. He's got a sense of what people want here. So those 2 criteria alone, take out the property and the line of sight and the cost of development. Would sway me, but you guys have made the decision, and I think appropriately, so.
Well, they're about to make the decision.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, maybe tangentially, I would like whoever develops the property to consider maybe increasing the percentage of affordable housing, maybe partnering with the Affordable Housing Trust to compensate for the balance. So it's just kind of an aside, looking forward.
as an aside, if there could be some arrangement worked out with some certain incentives, because affordable housing is very expensive to produce.
The town does have some funds.
Yes. And if it's all right with you, we can just see if anybody who's viewing the meeting via Zoom wants to add a comment or have a question. Seeing and hearing none.
We have
They're all
one
talking at
person
once.
What's that?
Would you like to make a comment? Okay.
Forgive me, I should have looked over here before I went up there. All right, well, I'll move that our recommendation for the bylaw, no, not a recommendation, that what we make part of the proposed MBTA bylaw would be the parcel, unofficially known as the NAC parcel.
Second.
Let's get, go ahead, we should note the actual address.
It's 187 Main
Thank
Street,
you.
19 acres.
There you go, 187 Main Street. Current owner listed on my map is David and Judith Marshall. Correct. There you go. So I'll accept that as a friendly amendment to my motion, which has been seconded. Any further discussion? And no? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? Ray Cook, aye.
Deb Hamilton, aye.
Brian Murphy, aye.
Tim Cronin, aye.
Ann Bardine, aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Great. So
Thank you.
the next
There we
item
go.
is
Thank
kind of a housekeeping item. It's for the select board to vote to refer this to hearing for the planning board. Usually we do that like the meeting after, so Katrina suggested we do it all together and then you'll. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I make a motion that we refer. How to big phrase. Yeah, refer this to the planning board to public hearing.
Conduct a public hearing, conduct a public hearing, is still relay district, is that what
That's what I'm
you're saying, Rick?
Sure, that sounds exactly, that's the way I said it. Thank you.
It will be March 18th.
Is that, so
Okay,
that was a motion, was a second.
yes.
Yeah.
I'll second it. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so the final item is just next steps. So the hearing, public hearing will be March 18th. I know Katrina and Ted and members of the planning board are working on a kind of a communication outreach program for residents.
Right.
Anything else you want to add? on that?
What's involved, kind of with the mechanics of getting the bylaw or a zoning map, like getting it to where it's like ready for everyone to review?
You mean the actual zoning? map?
Yeah, just to make this change, like, is that like, can be done this week, or is that more time?
Well, so we already have the maps that were done by
Right.
Dotson and Flickr. If you want
But just to
something,
get it down to like one, so that, just going forward, when people are directed to review things on the
Yeah, we don't
website, that like, they know exactly what's proposed and not just to kind
Here
I've
once
already
again,
got it
of, okay,
done.
okay, great.
and here once again, I have to jump in.
Yeah.
What Dodson and Flinker came up with is one scenario, a potential scenario. It has to be clear in every public communication that that is not the development that we'll get in the end. That it is a development which would conform to the proposed bylaw. Other configurations, fewer units, more units, a different layout of the drive, all those things are possible. Because if, it's my experience that people are actually looking at that and saying, this is what the town will build. And that is wrong on many levels. But it's easy for people who haven't spent so much time with this to jump to that conclusion. So we have to be careful when we put forward a map, that the map is just showing the overlay district.
It's similar to the map that we just had up
Yes.
there, just.
And that the scenarios,
One
the
parcel
scenarios
goes up view.
from the consultant, of course, are already available. And people can look at that to see an example of what could be done.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that that distinction is there. Otherwise, people could be upset at a public hearing and a town meeting based on the wrong assumption. We have to be super careful. to be very straight with everybody about this stuff. Can't emphasize that enough.
That's a good question in the public hearing. When you have that, the regulations as you currently have them, are you open for modifications to them at the hearing? Can it be then modified?
Yes, we don't expect there to be substantial change, but a public hearing is the sort of thing where to me, it's not just a rubber stamp, we checked off a box, now it can go forward to town meeting. Yeah, we really want to hear from the public.
I mean, I've got a couple of concerns. I mean, the regulation overall, I would hope, move forward. 40-foot high buildings with 5-foot setbacks off the streets is just so out of character for West Newbury. I'll be looking at issues like that for reconsideration.
There you go,
So,
see? Yeah, and at the public hearing, we're all members of the public and, you know, some people who've been around a while and, you know, served various roles in town, you know, your opinion's super valuable. Although you've been very modest in saying that you're just some guy.
as we all are, Ray. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, anything else we need to discuss on this?
Nope.
All right, great.
Move to adjourn,
Yeah.
planning board, move to adjourn,
Second.
all in favor,
Aye.
planning board's adjourned, thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
No.
Well done.
He just wants to go to 11 again.
You guys, you can adjourn if you want to.
All right.
Who am I to say?
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.